Good morning, everybody. It's a little bit after 10 o'clock, and this is IT in 10 for March 29th, 2017. The 10th episode of IT in 10. We started this right before Thanksgiving last fall. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in these online webinars. And just a reminder, if you have questions as we go through, feel free to use the GoToMeeting chat window. Today we're going to be talking about the questions that not only WIOA candidates should be asking of their training providers, but the questions that career counselors should be asking of their WIOA candidates as they go through the selection phase of choosing a training provider, particularly an IT training provider. And a lot of this is rooted in adult learning theory. We don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this, but certainly it's, forgive the graphic, the difference between playing with building blocks as a child and crafting the building blocks of a career as an adult. Adult learners are different. Their motivations are different. I myself have 3 kids in school. They go to school because they have to. They have no choice. As an adult, our motivations are more self-directed. We want to make sure that the candidates that come through our door are motivated to complete the training, are motivated to pursue certifications. Obviously, experience comes into play here as well, something that you won't get with a grade school or a high school or even a college age learner. And that can be good or bad. Experience certainly comes into play if you're talking about a mid-career IT professional who's looking to take the next step into management, comes into play as somebody who's making a career change. And certainly in reviewing resumes of folks that come in to want to make a change into the IT profession, taking a look at their experience and saying, okay, is this something that has skills that are transferable to IT is an important thing to do. Adult learners are different. Adults also learn differently. As younger students, as high school kids, it's very rote. It's here's some things to memorize, and you go ahead and memorize them and regurgitate them as a part of an exam. Adults, they learn by doing, and they're more problem-centered. You want to, instead of just having a rote set of things to memorize, you want to talk about a skill set in terms of solving a problem that you'll face, particularly in a career. And obviously it's important from the get-go to make sure that adult learners have buy-in, and they're the ones setting the goals. It's not being set by a career counselor. It's not being set by somebody from a training provider who perhaps has reached out to them as a part of a sales process. Key question you want to ask, you want to make sure that your candidates are asking is, what's the modality of the training? How is it delivered? 3 basic ways that you'll see here within the Chicagoland area: instructor-led training, and that's traditional classroom. You'll have an instructor in front of a classroom, usually a computer lab of some sort. It's what we all think of when we think of training or going to school. The first and one of the more popular variants on that is instructor-led online or virtual instructor-led training. This is actually very similar to what we're doing right now. You have a live instructor in a virtual classroom, so to speak, here at GoToMeeting, where I'm leading a session. You have the opportunity to participate via phone or via the chat window. But still there's somebody leading the class, somebody you can ask questions of. And then e-learning, strictly e-learning or computer-based training, CBT is a phrase that gets thrown out quite a bit. No live instructor at all. It's strictly self-paced. You're given a set of software to follow or a set of videos to watch, but there's no opportunity for interaction during the learning period, and you proceed at the pace that you want to proceed at. You know, when it comes to instructor-led training, if that's an option, it's certainly well within your rights to ask to meet the instructor as a candidate for WIOA training and find out if this is somebody whose teaching style is going to suit your learning style. Ask questions about how large the class is. Typically, a lot of adult learning products aren't meant to be delivered in large lecture halls. They're meant to be delivered to groups of 20 or less typically. And then what's the makeup of a class? Certainly, as a more experienced person, if you're a more experienced candidate, you want to make sure that the rest of the learners in the class have experience that's comparable to your own. Why? Well, if there's a lot of entry-level people there, it's going to mean that the class is going to be a little bit slower. It's going to be dragged back a little bit, and certainly as a more experienced candidate, your learning experience won't be quite as good. Instructor-led online, key thing is technical requirements. Hey, if I'm logging in via a laptop, what kind of internet connection do I need? Do I need special software on my machine? Does that special software require a certain set of hardware to make it work right? And a key question here is how do I as a student interact with the instructor then? Here we're always up front here in IT in 10, and we talk about, hey, use the chat window if you have questions. What are the opportunities that I have to ask questions during an instructor-led online session? And here we're talking about sessions that are a lot longer than these 10-minute webinars that we do every couple of weeks. We're talking about days worth of training. You want to make sure that that's a reasonable thing to ask the students to do and that the instructor will be able to respond. And then particularly when it comes to IT training, how are labs handled? If you're talking about something like a CompTIA A+ class where you're talking about the basics of taking apart a computer and putting it back together, well, in a traditional instructor-led session, there's almost certainly going to be a lab of some sort where you're actually disassembling the machine. How is that handled in an instructor-led online session? Is it a simulation? Are students expected to come back in for labs and take care of them on their own? E-learning, some of the same questions that come up in instructor-led online. What are the technical requirements? Am I logging into a website? Does it require a certain amount of bandwidth? If it's software that I'm putting on my machine, how big is the software? What kind of machine do I need to have to make sure that it runs correctly? And then, one piece obviously that's missing with e-learning and strictly self-paced learning is that how do I get feedback? If I have questions, where do those go? Am I emailing them to some off-site resource who might take a couple of days to get back to me? Is there a chat function available? If it's a website that I'm logging into for the e-learning, is there a chat function where I can get some sort of immediate answers to my questions? Once we get past training modality, you want to talk about how long is the class? How many hours are you going to be in the classroom? And the best comparison I can make here is it a boot camp style class, or is the curriculum a little bit longer and stretched out over multiple sessions or multiple weeks? If you're an experienced project manager and you're going to get your PMP and you've done project management for several years, you know what, a boot camp style session, 1 week's worth of training, 40 hours compressed into 5 days, that might be appropriate for you. We're talking about teaching to pass an exam versus teaching to a skill, and because you have experience in project management, that might work for you. However, if you're new to IT, say, and you are taking a class that's an A+ class or an MTA class, you might need a little bit more time to absorb this material and absorb the problems that you're going to be facing. And a boot camp style class that's a week or two might not be suited to your learning style. It's important that WIOA candidates understand what their own learning style is going to be and where their level of experience is, and compare it against how the class is structured. More fundamentally, what's the courseware? What is the experience of the instructor? How long have they been teaching it? If they're teaching to a certain certification, do they hold that certification? If they're teaching to, say for Microsoft has their own instructor certification program. Are they a certified Microsoft instructor? If they're a project management instructor or an Agile Scrum instructor, have they done this in the real world? And this is particularly important for adult learners because they're going to have, odds are, real-world questions. And you want to make sure that the instructor has the experience necessary to answer those questions when they come up. A bulk of the training providers here within the Chicagoland area, they tend to be smaller shops. So asking not only how often does the training run, and I don't just mean in terms of schedule, but what's the cancellation rate? And certainly with all of the major training providers here in Chicago, you can go onto their website and see when the next class is scheduled. An important question to ask of that training provider is, okay, how often in the last 6 months has this class been canceled? And what's the class size with that? As we kind of intimated this before, it's important to understand that a lot of these training products aren't designed for large lecture halls, and instructors, in fact, will probably raise their hand if they're teaching a class that's too big because they won't be able to give the amount of attention that they need. Cancellation rate is a key thing, and certainly a common refrain I hear from a lot of career counselors here within the Chicagoland area. Hey, the class cancels all the time. Well, this is something that you need to do up front and ask and say, well, how often in the last 6 months has this class run, and how big were each of those classes? And then, of course, when you're done with the class, what's the support that you're getting from the training provider? Particularly key for certification track classes. Is there a resource I can go to answer my questions once I've left the classroom? Can I reach back out to the instructor? Does he hold some sort of physical or virtual office hours? That's why I put that in quotes there, where I can go back to him and say, hey, I'm studying for the exam right now, and here's something that's come up that I don't understand. Can you help me with it? Does the training provider have study groups to help students prepare for certification exams? Is there the opportunity to go back in and practice with labs? And this is critical, obviously, if the training provider offers hands-on labs where you're working with routers or switches and you're physically taking apart things. Hey, can I come back in and work with that a little bit so I can get more experience? And what are the prep materials beyond just the courseware that I'm getting in the classroom? What kinds of extra materials above and beyond that, whether they be additional e-learning modules or self-tests? What's available to me as a student to help prepare for the exam? What's your retake policy? And that varies from provider to provider, but it's important to remember, as the WIOA system, in a way, we're buying a result here, that the training provider should be vouching and saying, you know what, I've got a reasonable expectation that if this person takes this class, they should be able to pass the certification exam. Well, what happens if they don't? Are they allowed to retake the class? Is there some sort of reasonable policy in place to help us get to the result that we all want? And then the obvious one, I don't want to hit upon this too much, it's not really the focus of our session today, but are there career services offered? Once I've gone through the training and perhaps received one or more certifications, what options are available from the training provider itself to help me get placed back into my chosen field? You know, the important thing to remember here is it's an investment in a career, and I use this particular bit of clip art with purpose. In a way, I wish that an ITA here in Cook County wasn't just a piece of paper that gave somebody permission to go and attend training. These are investments of anywhere from $4,000 up to $15,000, depending on what program you're going through. And in a way, I wish that when the candidate got permission to take the training, instead of handing them a piece of paper, we were handing them a briefcase full of money and saying, okay, now take this over to the training provider, because I think that interaction with the cash there makes this a real thing. The $15,000 is more than the tuition of certainly many community colleges in the area. It's the price of a decent used car if you're looking for one. And for some reason, I always felt that giving them the cash would make this decision more real to them and force candidates to ask the questions they might not otherwise ask. That about wraps things up for today's IT in 10. We'll be into April next month. If you have any questions for future webinars, feel free to email me at djacobs@nationalable.org. Next time we'll be covering, we'll start to go into the interview process and some things that are specific to IT that you should be telling your candidates as they prep for interviews. I don't see any questions in the chat window here, so have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.